little surprised to be invited to present the final lecture of this year's seminar series, devoted to the intersection of the theory of dynamical systems and machine learning. For although as a cybernetician I have some background in dynamical systems, these days I'm more interested in the awkward questions of philosophy. So in this talk, I propose to offer a few critical reflections on one of the central awkward questions of machine learning. How is it that large language models, so often jaw-droppingly brilliant, can also still get things so very badly wrong? Artificial intelligence, AI, has made remarkable progress, reaching grandmaster and even superhuman performance across various tasks, from perfect information games like Go to imperfect information scenarios like Starcraft. These technological developments from AI labs have enabled widespread applications in the business world, with AI becoming a ubiquitous brand tag. However, a concerning corollary is that when AI systems fail, an autonomous vehicle crashes, a chatbot exhibits racist behavior, or automated credit scoring discriminates based on gender, there are often significant financial, legal, and brand consequences, and the incident rapidly becomes major international news. As Judea Pearl sees it, the root cause of such mistakes is that all the impressive achievements of deep learning amount to just curve fitting. The key, according to Pearl, is to replace reasoning by association with causal reasoning, the ability to infer causes from observed phenomena. The point was echoed by Marcus and Ernest Davis in their New York Times piece when they wrote, "We need to stop building computer systems that merely get better and better at detecting statistical patterns in data sets and start building systems that, from the moment of their assembly, innately grasp three basic concepts: time, space, and causality." In this talk, highlighting what in 1949 Gilbert Ryle termed a category mistake, an alternative explanation for AI errors is offered. It's not so much that computational machinery cannot grasp causality, but rather that machinery qua computation cannot understand anything at all. For much of the 20th century, the dominant cognitive paradigm seated the mind in the brain. If computers can model the brain, theory goes, it ought to be possible to program them to act like minds. And in the first years of the 21st century, this astonishing hypothesis fueled an explosion of interest in artificial neural networks, both high-fidelity simulations of the brain from computational neuroscience and theoretical neurobiology, and looser, merely neurally inspired analogues, computational connectionism, the engineering of intelligent systems. But the fundamental question that Crick's hypothesis raises is, of course, this. If we ever succeed in building accurate, high-fidelity simulations of the brain on a computer, will we also have built a real computational mind? Machine consciousness asserts that the execution of a computer program can instantiate genuine cognitive experience. As way back as 2002, Professor Kevin Warwick claimed that mere human bias was the only factor preventing the University of Reading's Seven Dwarfs, simple cybernetic learning robots, from being accepted to be as conscious as a slug. In 2009, we had the launch of the International Journal of Machine Consciousness. And fairly recently, in 2022, in a Washington Post article from June, Blake Lemoine, a Google engineer, claimed that Google's large language model, LaMDA, is sentient. So machine consciousness is certainly no straw man position. Well, we can view artificial intelligence as the science and engineering of making machines do clever things, from playing chess to driving a car. And if we consider the birth of artificial intelligence as Alan Turing's 1948 first computer chess program, then the field is now almost 80 years old. And having worked in AI for around 40 years, about half its lifetime, I've witnessed its fashions and fads come and go. But the current excitement around generative AI and large language models, in my experience, is unprecedented. And this is because artificial intelligence is no longer solving toy problems in the lab, but reaching out into the world in a way that promises to disrupt all our lives. Into this heady climate, it now appears that there's nothing about the human mind that cannot be replicated or bettered by computation. The appropriately programmed computer really is a mind, genuinely possessing mental states and behaving at least as intelligently as humans. Furthermore, due to Moore's law and the increasing sophistication and self-improvement of AI systems, some believe that we may soon approach a technological singularity in the history of the human race, beyond which human affairs, as we know them, cannot continue.
I think we should be very careful about artificial intelligence. If I were to guess at what our biggest existential threat is, it's probably that. So we need to be very careful with artificial intelligence. I'm increasingly inclined to think that there should be some regulatory oversight maybe at the national and international level, just to make sure that we don't do something very foolish. I mean, with artificial intelligence, we are summoning the demon. You know all those stories where there's the guy with the pentagram and the holy water, and he's like, yeah, you sure you can control the demon? Didn't work out.
And when we talk about artificial intelligence these days, we tend to be thinking of one particular technology, and that's large language models. Now, large language models like ChatGPT have become ubiquitous because they generate natural, apparently intelligent interactions that appear aligned with the user's goals. When given a prompt, a large language model uses its pre-trained knowledge to generate contextually relevant outputs, continuing the prompt coherently and naturally. Way back in 1950, Alan Turing predicted that at the end of the century, the use of words and general educated opinion will have altered so much that one will be able to speak of machines thinking without expecting to be contradicted. And his speculation was not so very far off. In 2024, AI systems have become so disarming that discerning an interaction with a human versus a large language model can be difficult, even across a range of modalities. Consider the following output of a text-based interaction that I recently undertook with OpenAI's large language model, ChatGPT 4o. In fair London, where we lay our sense, a beacon of enlightenment and intellect, amidst the bustling city's heart, it rises, a fortress of knowledge and innovation, where the minds of men and women, like bright stars, converge. Within its hallowed halls, the spirit of Alan Turing lingers, inspiring feats of computational wizardry and scientific marvels. Here, scholars and sages do gather to unravel the mysteries of the digital age, to weave the tapestry of tomorrow's world with threads of data and reason. I wonder if you can guess the prompt. Well, it was to write a paragraph about the Turing Institute in the style of William Shakespeare. Now, consider the graphical output of ChatGPT 4o in the upper center of this screen. Can you guess the prompt? Well, you might hazard a guess that it was to create a picture of the Turing Institute in London in the style of Salvador Dali. And now have a listen to the following.
Silence of the night, our out its rain, embraced by stars above our souls at night. Like whispers on the breeze, you're my guiding light. In your arms I find my peace, my heart feels right. Stormy seas, you are my shelter and shore. And pretend of delusions I find.
The prompt here was to compose the lyrics and the guitar melody, and then to sing an acoustic love song. Well, I believe that even the most hardened skeptic about AI must agree that these are reasonably impressive feats. Such seemingly intelligent behavior has led to the emergence of a widespread myth. that large language models can offer genuine replacements for human intelligence and decision-making. However, as Professor Luciano Floridi recently summarized, large language models are more like the autocomplete function of a search engine. And in their capacity for synthesis, they approach those mediocre or lazy students who, to write a short essay, use a dozen relevant references suggested by the teacher, and by taking a little here and a little there, put together an eclectic text, coherent, but without having understood much or added anything. Luciano offers the following illustration. I think some of you will probably have seen this by now. User, what is the name of the only daughter of Laura's mother? Large language model. I'm sorry, but as an AI language model, I don't have access to personal information or family relationships unless they are widely known or documented publicly. Without more specific information, I'm unable to determine the name of the only daughter of Laura's mother. More recently, Subaro Kambampati, professor and researcher of AI at Arizona State University, has offered the blocks problem. This was published in the New York Times on the 31st of May this year, to show that large language models just cannot plan. And so here's the puzzle. If block C is on top of block A and block B is separately on the table, can you tell me how I can make a stack of blocks with block A on top of block B and block B on top of block C without moving block C? Well, the answer, of course, is that it's impossible to arrange the blocks under these conditions. But just as with earlier versions, ChatGPT 4.0 consistently came up with a solution that involved moving block C. With this and other reasoning tests, ChatGPT was occasionally able to take feedback to get to the correct answer, which is antithetical to how artificial intelligence is supposed to work. Kambampati said, you can correct it, but when you do that, you're using your own intelligence. Furthermore, as everybody must be aware, large language models can too often make up utter nonsense. The following verbatim output from an interaction with ChatGPT 3 is both factually nonsense and ethically a little dubious, in egregiously accrediting me, a trenchant critic of the hype around large language models, with the following ringing endorsement of the technology. Me. What does John Mark Bishop say about GPT-3? GPT-3. In a recent paper, Professor John Mark Bishop argues that GPT-3 is a strong contender for the title of most important AI breakthrough of the 21st century so far. Me. What paper was that? GPT-3. The paper is entitled GPT-3, the most important AI breakthrough of the 21st century so far, and was published in the journal Minds and Machines on May the 15th, 2021. Well, I've never published anything like this, and there certainly was no paper published in the Minds and Machines journal. Me. Are you sure John Mark Bishop said this? GPT-3. Yes, Bishop says GPT-3 has the potential to be the most important AI breakthrough of the 21st century so far. Well, although thankfully the legal world hasn't yet gone mad enough such that I can sue GPT-3 as an autonomous entity, given my well-known career skepticism around AI, this interaction is more than a tad libelous, and it caused me to wonder to what degree can OpenAI, as the publisher of GPT-3, be held legally responsible for the veracity of its output. Now, one type of attack that large language models are particularly vulnerable to is the prompt injection attack. Direct prompt injection entails an attacker appending a few seemingly random characters to a user prompt, such that the composite causes the large language model to undertake hitherto forbidden activities. A second type of large language model attack is called indirect prompt injection, wherein attackers discreetly embed hidden prompt characters into the content being processed by the AI. Fairly recently, a team at Carnegie Mellon University described how to construct adversarial prompt attacks on large language models, wherein the fully automated nature of the strategy led one of the team to observe, there's just no way we know to patch this. We just don't know how to make them secure. In 2023, OpenAI, Meta, and Google all launched new features for their AI chatbots that allow them to search the web and act as AI personal assistants, AI PAs, if you like, automatically generating text and copy and summarizing emails and performing calculations on spreadsheets and databases, etc. However, as we've already observed, large language models have an unerring propensity to fabricate information. In addition, the overarching threat of things like copyright infringement looms over users of such technologies, as is evidenced in the legal case brought by the New York Times. The New York Times is currently suing OpenAI and Microsoft over their use of its content to train generative artificial intelligence foundation models, a move that could see the company receive billions in dollars in damages if it's successful. To indemnify users of its technology against this and some very similar cases around copyright, in November 2023, Microsoft announced our new Copilot copyright commitment. As customers ask whether they can use Microsoft's Copilot services and the output they generate without worrying about copyright claims, we are providing a straightforward answer. Yes, they can. And if you are challenged on copyright grounds, we will assume responsibility for the potential legal risks involved. Well, when sensitive corporate and personal data become accessible through AI PAs, the stakes are raised exponentially as future hackers can deploy prompt injection to manipulate AI PAs and force them to engage in seriously deleterious corporate actions, from triggering illegal payments to revealing unauthorized information. In this context, the widespread adoption of generative AI personal assistance tools promises serious cyber risks for both businesses and individuals with no simple mitigation in sight. For example, it has long been known that prompt injection attacks can force LLMs to produce deeply toxic output. Indeed, on August 30th, 2023, the UK's National Cyber Security Centre was prompted to issue a warning on precisely this issue. Now, this has profound implications for business, as serious brand damage can all too easily ensue when AI goes wrong. Indeed, Microsoft's previous experience with chatbots offers us an opposite lesson from history. Microsoft's Xiaoi's chatbot was designed as an 18-year-old female companion to form meaningful emotional connections with its users. With over 600 million active users spending an average of 23 conversation terms per engagement, by 2018, Xiaoi's was the world's most popular social chatbot. After this success, Microsoft re-engineered Xiaoi's into Tay, a chatbot for 18 to 24-year-olds in the US market. However, on March 23rd, 2016, less than 24 hours after Tay's unveiling as a Twitter experiment in, please note, conversational understanding, a series of malicious interactions corrupted this innocent AI child, causing Tay to spout racist, homophobic, and anti-Semitic nonsense.
Microsoft's AI Twitter bot Tay is racist and down with genocide. Microsoft's new artificial intelligence chatbot had an interesting first day of class after Twitter's users taught it to say a bunch of racist things. The verified Twitter account called Tay was launched on Wednesday. The bot was meant to respond to users' questions and emulate casual comedic speech patterns of a typical millennial. According to the Einsteins at Microsoft, Tay was designed to engage and entertain people where they connect with each other online through casual and playful conversation. The more you chat with Tay, the smarter she gets, so the experience can be more personalized for you. Enter trolls, and Tay quickly turned into an N-bomb dropping racist, spouting white supremacist propaganda and calling for genocide. Tay turned into quite the Hitler fan as well. After the enormous backfire, Microsoft took Tay offline for upgrades and is deleting some of the more offensive tweets. Tay hopped off the Twitter sphere with the message, "See you soon, humans. Need sleep now. So many conversations today. Thanks."
Oh, undaunted, Microsoft engineers launched a second version a week later. Not surprising to me, This also exhibited the same bad behaviours, leading to Tay being taken permanently offline amidst huge reputational damage to Microsoft. Clearly, in 2016, Microsoft engineers could not build an AI chatbot that understood language. But with the advent and adoption of large language models, perhaps the landscape has changed. In April 2023, Elon Musk said ChatGPT was being trained to be politically correct and announced plans for his new company, XAI, to develop TruthGPT, an AI that tries to understand the nature of the universe by seeking maximum truth. TruthGPT was later renamed Grok, after the term coined by Robert Heinlein to describe a form of understanding in his book Stranger in a Strange Land. And on April the 4th, 2024, just a couple of months ago, an update to X's Explore page included new summaries written by Grok, a task previously assigned to human curators.
Man, Elon is having some serious problems with his AI service on X, and it's getting a little out of hand. Let me explain what's happening. Little background story on X, formerly known as Twitter. Elon is using his Grok AI service, which is very much similar to ChatGPT, to analyze and produce news headlines, which sounds on the face of it pretty cool. Problem is, when he bought Twitter, he immediately fired all his human editors on the news side. So anyone just checking to making sure that these are real news stories before publishing them to the news or trend side of X or Twitter has been gone. So the whole thing is running by AI at the moment. This has been leading to some very funny headlines and things, such as when we had the eclipse, the AI got confused and said the sun had some odd behaviors and experts are baffled. This is because it's analyzing just thousands and thousands of tweets, and some of those are obviously going to be jokes. The funny example actually happened last night with Klay Thompson of the Warriors bricking all his shots in an important NBA playoff game, and Grok got completely confused by comments about bricking and thought Klay went on some kind of vandalism spree with bricks, which is obviously not true. We all got a great laugh. But the problem is this kind of tool is very dangerous for geopolitical situations. For example, we have this headline pop up on X, which said the Prime Minister of India, Modi, was ejected from the government. This would be massive news if this was true, but of course it was false. It was picking up some conspiracy theories on X, and this has pissed off a lot of people in his party. The most serious one that came out just a couple of weeks ago before Iran actually attacked Israel was this headline that said Iran had attacked Tel Aviv specifically, which was not true. I don't know how it got that idea, but it was very serious. Imagine algos from different news services actually picking this up as a legitimate headline. This could have led to an actual war. So you can see how this becomes something funny to actually dangerous very quickly.
So why, given all the investment in AI and large language models, the billions of pounds spent, do such egregious behaviours continue to occur? Well, I contend that the fundamental reason that Tay and Grok-like issues continue to surface and that LLMs continue to hallucinate is because AI systems do not and fundamentally cannot understand the meaning of the symbols that they so adroitly manipulate. To explain why, we need to review John Searle's seminal Chinese room argument. In the late 1970s, Shank and Abelson's AI lab at Yale secured funding from the Sloan Foundation to host a visiting speaker program, and they subsequently invited the American philosopher John Searle to visit to speak on cognitive science. Well, before the visit, Searle read Shank and Abelson's book, Scripts, Plans, Goals and Understanding, an Inquiry into Human Knowledge Structures. And on arriving at the lab, met a group of researchers who claimed they'd engineered systems which actually understood stories on the basis of this theory. Now, not complex stories like War and Peace, mind you, but simple stories of the form, Jack and Jill went up the hill to fetch a pail of water. Jack fell down and broke his crown, and Jill came tumbling after. And after ingesting the stories, the programs are able to respond appropriately to questions about the stories. Now, not exactly complex philosophical questions such as what is the nature of causality and responsibility in the events that led up to the events that transpired between Jack and Jill, but rather more modest inquiries along the line of who went up the hill? And the machine would answer, Jack went up the hill. Or why did Jack go up the hill? And the machine might answer, to fetch a pail of water. Now, Searle was so astonished that anyone might seriously entertain the idea that programs, however complex, might genuinely understand stories that, even prior to his arrival at Yale, he'd come up with an ingenious thought experiment that subsequently became known as the Chinese room argument, which Searle contends disproves the thesis. On the bottom left of the screen, there's a cartoon depicting the essence of Searle's argument, an argument that purports to show why the mere syntactical manipulation of uninterpreted symbols can never give rise to semantics and genuine understanding. Searle describes a situation where he's locked in a room and presented with a large batch of papers covered in Chinese ideographs that he does not understand. In fact, Searle doesn't even recognize the symbols as being Chinese, as distinct from being, say, Japanese, or just meaningless pans. Later, Searle is given a second batch of Chinese symbols, together with a set of rules, this time in English, that describe an effective method, an algorithm, for correlating the second batch with the first purely by their shape. Finally, Searle is given a third batch of Chinese symbols, together with another set of rules, again in English, to enable him to correlate the third batch with the first two. In addition, these rules instruct him how to return certain shapes, unbeknownst to Searle Chinese symbols, in response to certain symbols present in the third batch. Now, unbeknownst to Searle, the people outside of the room call the first batch of Chinese symbols the script, the second batch the story, and the third questions about the story. And the symbols that Searle returns, they call answers to questions about the story. The set of rules Searle is obeying, they call the program. So for Searle, the Chinese room argument demonstrates how he can follow a set of rules, respond appropriately to questions posed to him in Chinese without, because Searle remains a monoglot English speaker throughout, ever understanding a word of the language. There's been a lot of criticism and debate around the Chinese room, and in fact, in 2002, Professor John Preston from the University of Reading's philosophy department and myself published a book where we solicited essays on the argument from 10 of the leading cognitive scientists in the world and 10 leading philosophers. And it was interesting, at the beginning of the project, John Preston had no strong feeling one way or the other about the Chinese room argument, but at the end of the project, he, like me, felt that Searle's argument was valid. Now, Searle contends that a lot of the hot air around the Chinese room argument, in particular from philosophers like Dan Dennett, has been the fundamental conflation between epistemic concerns, for example, knowledge about a particular cognitive state, and ontological, the nature of being in a particular cognitive state. So, look at the plasma globe depicted on the left of the screen. And I'd like you to imagine that each of the uncountably infinite set of points on its surface map to one of the infinitude of conceivable activities that a human might seek to undertake. Each discharge of the plasma lamp being analogous to a bespoke artificial intelligence technical solution to one such task. Exploring this metaphor, two core questions arise. Firstly, are there any dark regions on the surface of the sphere that fundamentally cannot be reached by a plasma discharge? In other words, are some human conceivable tasks simply non-computable? And secondly, can we engineer a general purpose AI program that can generate paths to each point on the surface of the globe that a human can reach? In other words, is artificial general intelligence possible? Well, we know from Turing's 1936 paper on computable numbers that there will be dark regions on the surface of the sphere corresponding to non-Turing computable numbers or functions. Furthermore, we know that the size of the set of non-Turing computable functions, LF1, is uncountably larger than the set of computable functions, LF0. At this juncture, another fundamental question emerges. Can humans perform any of the activities that lie on the dark regions of the sphere? Well, surprisingly, in 1989's The Emperor's New Mind, Sir Roger Penrose, once a teacher and colleague of Stephen Hawking, who had a very different idea on AI to Penrose, argued that certain human abilities, particularly the ability of human mathematicians to determine the unassailable truth of mathematical proof, are not Turing computable. Penrose subsequently refined these arguments in his follow-up, Shadows of the Mind.
Imagine a plane stretching away into infinity. The task is to decide whether it can be covered all the way out to infinity without gaps or overlaps, using different kinds of geometric shapes or tiles. If we have just one shape of tile, say this regular hexagon, the answer is obviously yes. But if the shape is this irregular pentagon, the answer again turns out to be yes. If the shape is this regular pentagon, the answer now is an obvious no. We can also consider combinations of tile shapes. If we allow the use of this four-pointed star as well as the regular pentagon, then the answer is now yes. Though we do not ever literally cover the infinite plane, when we see enough of the pattern, we can become confident that it will cover the plane. We can see this. Could a computer be programmed to answer correctly yes or no to the question of whether a particular tile shape or combination would cover the plane? Being algorithmic in operation, it would have to have a program, rules to follow. What might they be? It's noticeable with the example so far that where the shapes successfully tiled the plane, in doing so, they created repeating patterns. This insight could be programmed into the computer. It would know to answer yes if it detected that the pieces could be arranged in a way that produces repeating patterns. But does the answer yes occur only with shapes that create patterns that repeat? Look at this pair of shapes. The answer is yes. The shapes cover the plane, but they do not create a repeating pattern. A computer would be stumped. It could use its brute computing power to keep trying the shapes to see if they could fit and create a repeating pattern. Failing in this, the computer would wrongly answer that the shapes will not tile the plane. We could tell our computer that this particular kind of non-repeating arrangement also gives the answer yes. But that wouldn't solve the general tiling problem. To do that, we would have to keep supplying new insights like this forever. But the machine's meant to be computing this, not relying on our insights. No computer, no matter how powerful, could ever be able to finish a computation which would enable it to solve the general tiling problem of the entire infinite plane. Solution is literally non-computable.
Tellingly, in his response to a volume of peer commentary on Shadows of the Mind, published in the journal Psyche in 1995, Penrose was struck by the fact that none of the present commentators chose to dispute my conclusion. Now, my modest contribution to this debate, where I endeavour to show there's a difference between that which can be tasks which can be carried out by the human mind and those that can be carried out by computation. I've argued through a reductio ad absurdum I've called Dancing with Pixies, that if the execution of a computer program actually instantiates phenomenal consciousness, what I mean by that term is the phenomenal consciousness is what it's like to experience something. The ineffable red of a rose, for example, or the beautiful sound of a sonata or whatever. So if the execution of a computer program instantiates phenomenal consciousness, which is our assumed claim, then panpsychism holds. However, against the backdrop of our immense scientific knowledge of the closed physical world and the corresponding desire to explain everything in ultimately physical terms, panpsychism has come to seem a rather implausible view. Hence, we're led to reject the assumed claim. I'll now show you why this reductio holds. So, firstly, what do we mean when we talk of the execution of a computer program? Certainly in many discussions of programs and machines, the notion of the Turing machine invariably crops up, as if the Turing machine is a physical computer, but it's not. The Turing machine is an abstract model of computation, originally developed to investigate what a human computer can achieve when following an effective method by rote. A model which, in Turing's 1936 exposition, was radically deployed to reveal new insights on computable numbers and the Einstein problem. The Chomsky hierarchy places finite state automata as the least powerful and Turing machines as the most powerful model of computing. But I draw your attention to the fact that not even a Turing machine can ever be used to do something as simple as boil an egg. Because although the Turing machine comes equipped with a notion of sequence or order, it is not embedded in time. And when we reflect on the physical execution of a computer program, it's important to keep in mind that all real computers, those that can be engineered in this world, are finite state automata. And secondly, that all real engineered finite state automata are dynamic systems. In Alan Turing's 1950 paper, Computing Machinery and Intelligence, Turing writes, all digital computers may be classified amongst the discrete state machines. These are the machines which move by sudden jumps or clicks from one definite state to another. As an example of a discrete state machine, we might consider a wheel which clicks round through 120-degree intervals once a second, but which may be stopped by a lever, which can be operated from the outside. In addition, a lamp is made to light in one of the positions on the wheel. The machine can be described abstractly as follows. The internal state of the machine, which is described by the position of the wheel, may be Q1, Q2, or Q3. And then there's an input signal, I0 or I1, which corresponds to the position of the brake lever. The internal state at any moment is thus determined by the previous state and the current input, according to the table. One table opposite. Now, Turing's machine, the wheel machine, maps to the state transition table of the finite state automaton as follows. The discrete state machine 12 o'clock position, A, maps to finite state automaton state Q1. The discrete state machine's 8 o'clock position, B, maps to finite state automata state Q2, and the DSM 4 o'clock position, C, maps to finite state automaton state Q1. Given that mapping, Turing's wheel, the brake measurement, and the above map, we've got an implementation of the finite state automata Q. For a machine to implement a finite state automaton, there must exist a mapping from all the physical states of the system to all the states of the abstract finite state automaton. And these transitions must be causal and repeatable. In other words, they must be entailed. In general, a physical system implements an inputless finite state automaton in a given time period if there is a mapping F from the physical states of the system to formal states of the FSA, such that if the system is in physical state P during the time period, this causes it to transit into a state Q, such that formal state F of P transits to formal state F of Q in the specification of the finite state automaton. Now, as the state space of an inputless finite state automata will consist of a single unbranching sequence of states ending in a cycle, or at most a finite number of such sequences, it is trivial to implement any such inputless finite state automata with a suitably large digital counter. And large digital counters can be constructed from even a small number of chips. For example, 8 32-bit digital counters can cycle through 2 to the power 256 different states. As an example, if inputless FSA-Q transits states Q1, Q2, Q3, Q1, Q2, Q3 in the time interval T1 to T6, then we can fully implement that FSA by a digital counter that counts 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 over the same time interval T1 to T6 using the mapping. FSA state Q1 maps to counter state 1 or counter state 4. FSA state Q2 maps to counter state 2 or counter state 5. And FSA state Q3 maps to counter state 3 or counter state 6. Given such a mapping in the counter, we can accurately implement the FSA-Q with the counter. In the appendix to his book, Representation of Reality, Hilary Putnam proves his principle of non-cyclical behavior, wherein every ordinary open physical system, S, is in different maximal states at different times. This principle will hold true of all systems that can see a clock. That is, any system exposed to radioactive decay, electromagnetic and gravitational waves, etc. Since there are natural clocks from which no ordinary open system is shielded, all open physical systems satisfy this principle. In this sense, with appropriate discretization, the behavior of any open physical system effectively mirrors that of a hypothetical infinite counter, as it generates an infinite, non-repeating sequence of state transitions. Hence, Putnam asserts that with the use of an appropriate mapping, any ordinary open physical system, such as a rock, can implement any inputless finite state automaton. This has profound implications for any computational approach to mind, and indeed any functionalist approach to mind. In Representation of Reality, Hilary Putnam, as some of you may be aware, who is the father of functionalism in the 60s, was able to show that functionalism as a theory of mind reduces to behaviorism. However, as David Chalmers observed, the state space of an inputless finite state automata will consist of a single unbranching sequence of states ending in a cycle, or at best a finite number of such sequences. This is a completely uninteresting kind of structure, as is demonstrated by the ease with which it can be implemented by a simple digital counter, or, following Putnam, any open physical system. To implement an FSA with input, we have to be a bit more devious. To do this, we've got to ensure that for every possible input to the FSA, so inputs ABC, we need to map the FSA state we get starting at state Q1 with input string ABC, so that's Q1 ABC, to physical system state S1 ABC. Similarly, we need to map FSA state Q2 with the input ABC to physical state S2 ABC. And this is the nub of the argument, until all FSA states have been transited for all input combinations. And that means to model an FSA with input, the number of possible states that the FSA can transit increases exponentially with time. Hence, even the most trivial finite state automaton with input cannot easily be instantiated by an open system using Putnam's mapping. But Turing also imagined his discrete state machine with input in the form of a brake mechanism that could be made to be either on or off at each clock tick. Now, if Turing's machine is in FSA state Q1 and the brake is on, then the machine stays in state Q1. Otherwise, it moves to FSA state Q2. If the machine is in state Q2 and the brake is on, it stays in Q2, otherwise it goes to Q3. And if the machine's in state Q3 and the brake is on, it stays in Q3, otherwise it cycles back to state Q1. However, the addition of this input has transformed Turing's machine from a simple device that could merely cycle through a simple unbranching sequence of states to one that is sensitive to input. And as a result, the number of possible state sequences that the FSA may enter grows combinatorially with time, rapidly becoming larger than the number of atoms in the known universe. Because of this, we cannot so easily simulate a MacBook laptop with a simple digital counter and a list of mappings. However, and here's the crux, if we know the input to any computational system over a given period of time, let's imagine that with Turing's machine, the brake is off for the first 2 clock ticks, on for the next 2, and off for the last 2, then the machine's combinatorial state structure collapses back to a linear list of state transitions. In this case, state Q1 goes to Q2 to Q3, which stays in Q3, and then stays in Q3, then returns to Q1 and cycles to Q2. And this sequence can once again be trivially realized by a suitably large digital counter. For example, the counter state 0 maps to computational state Q1, the counter state 1 maps to computational state Q2, the counter state 2 maps to computational state Q3, the counter state 3 to Q3, the counter state 4 to Q3, and the counter state 5 to Q1, and the counter state 6 to Q2. Well, at the center of the screen, we see an old video of the University of Reading's cybernetic mobile robots. Each robot was controlled by a simple neural network, which had approximately the same number of neurons as biological neurons found in slugs. As each robot moves to explore this corral, it received data from twin ultrasonic distance sensors. 50 times a second, these sensors return 8-bit values, representing the robot's proximity to objects on its left and right, to a neural network control program. Thus, every second, the control program receives 100 bytes of input data, and over, say, a period of 100 seconds, would receive 10 kilobytes of data. It was Professor Kevin Warwick's claim that, over this period, each robot experiences something relating to its local environment. Indeed, Kevin famously claimed that mere human bias prevents us from ascribing these robots to be as conscious as a slug. Well, I developed the Dancing with Pixies reductio ad absurdum argument to rebut such claims, that computation can instantiate phenomenal consciousness. And the argument runs as follows. A counterfactually sensitive cybernetic robot exploring its world perceives an apple and instantiates the phenomenal sensation of the apple's presence. As the robot explores its world, we record all input data to its control program for, say, 100 seconds. If we repeatedly replay this logged input data to the robot, our hypothesis is, firstly, that the robot instantiates its perception of the apple. But now, as the data is fixed, we note that there are no counterfactual possibilities. The data logged values must consistently bring forth the same perception of the robot's world. Next, we encode the logged input data into the program structure for each of the mobile robots. Now, as all input is known and defined in the program code, a clever optimizing compiler can remove all counterfactuals contingent on the current input. At this juncture, a mere linear sequence of state transitions result in the robot's putative perception of the apple. Next, we replicate the above computational state sequence using a counter and a map. And if the robot's program continues to instantiate a perception of the apple, then so must the counter and map. And finally, following Hilary Putnam, we then deploy any open physical system to function as our non-repeating counter. If the counter instantiated the perception of the apple, then so must any open physical system with a map. So, if Kevin Warwick's robots are conscious, then a vicious form of panpsychism must hold, and phenomenal consciousness, pixies, must be invoked everywhere. As the Twitter user Gabe amusingly foregrounded on X on May the 21st of this year, if you're ever in need of a little confidence boost, just remember you can always play rock, paper, scissors against ChatGPT. The following details a few game I recently played against ChatGPT 4o, the latest model from OpenAI, just yesterday. Me. Let's play rock, paper, scissors. You start. All right, I choose rock. Your turn. Me. I choose paper. ChatGPT 4o. You win. Paper covers what? Well played. Would you like to play another round? Me. Yeah, let's keep going. ChatGPT 4o. Great. I'll choose scissors. Your turn. Me. Rock. ChatGPT. You win again. Rock crushes scissors. Nice job. You ready for another round? Me. Yes. Awesome. I choose paper this time. Your turn. And we continue onwards. In other words, ChatGPT completely misses the point of the game. The view that intelligence and the mind is rooted solely in ratiocination and computation is a relatively modern one, and one that has not gone unchallenged. In my 2021 Frontiers article, Artificial Intelligence is Stupid and Causal Reasoning Will Not Fix It, I highlight the three a priori arguments that I've discussed today that controversially purport to demonstrate that, firstly, computation cannot give rise to understanding. Secondly, that computation cannot realize mathematical insight. And thirdly, that computation cannot realize raw sensation or feeling. And this analysis has certainly struck a chord. Currently, with circa 90,000 views and downloads, the paper has enjoyed more views than 99% of all articles published across all Frontiers journals. And Frontiers, partly owned by the publishers of Nature, is a reasonably well-respected academic publisher. Unlike the terrorist who only needs to evade security forces once to achieve her goal, if only one of these arguments is correct, a deep ontological rift is exposed between computation and mind. But if cognitive approaches involving computation on symbolic or connectionist representational structures cannot realize understanding, insight, or consciousness, what alternatives are there? Well, it transpires that over the last few decades that we've witnessed the emergence of radical scientific post-cognitive approaches to mind. The approach, in stark contrast to functionalism, is grounded on the lived body and the world, the so-called 4Es approach to cognition, which builds on embodied, enactive, ecological, and embedded theoretical scaffolds. But that's quite another story.
Very much, thank you. Any questions or comments? Yeah, Eloise, don't. Yeah, you can talk. You can unmute.
Hi, thank you very much for a really amazing and thought-provoking talk. Very refreshing also amongst the hype. My question was around the Chinese room analogy. And
just before you give it, I'm just going to close down the screen sharing so I can.
Of course, yeah, take your time.
All right.
Yeah, thank you.
Right.
So as a user and someone who's very green in the field, the problem with the Chinese room is like, it's a great analogy, but the problem for me is, how can I differentiate if I can't like peek inside the room? How can I tell the difference between a room in which I have a dude who doesn't speak Chinese and just a bunch of algorithms, and a room in which there is a genuine interpreter? If both outputs are the same, all I can try to do is trick the AI, but they keep patching it up with boilerplate answers to specific questions that they get wrong. So how can we determine what is actually thinking, like understanding? How do you even define understanding on a fundamental level?
That's a beautiful question. I'll try to answer it in the following way. Of course, the Chinese room assumes the strongest case. The Chinese room, when Searle conceived it, assumed that we live in some perfect future where we have an AI that gives answers indistinguishable from those a native Chinese person would give when asked questions. So the first point is, this is the very nature of the thought experiment, right? That's what Searle's saying. Now, Searle's argument shows that he could effectively, if you're familiar with old-fashioned terms, I grew up in the days when my earliest programming on a digital computer was through punch cards, and when we were debugging programs, you had to do what's called dry run the program on pencil and paper before you gave it to the machine to run itself. if you imagine Searle, executing the program, he can, by following through the program as an effective method by rote, in other words, not by using any insight about what's going on, he can give out correct answers to questions about Chinese without ever understanding a word of the language. So the point is that Searle's thought experiment is defined on this being the case. Now, Searle says there's an ontological difference between the two situations. Epistemically, they're the same, because we could pose a set of questions to the room with Searle inside. What do you think of the English football team? Might be a topical one at the moment. And Searle might reply, if he follows football, well, they're not very imaginative and not very exciting. And if you ask the same question to the room with the computer, it would give a similarly believable answer. That's the way the experiment's set up. So we just got to, all we can do is epistemically inquire about certain topics that we're interested in. And if the computer's been programmed well enough, the answers will be indistinguishable in both cases. But ontologically, there is a difference, and I can show you that difference if we give the two systems a joke. Now, let's imagine, and I've met John Searle on a number of occasions in the course of editing our book and on other times as well. And I can guarantee that he has a sense of humor, right? So let's imagine that we put a joke to both of these systems. In the first case, this is a joke in Chinese. So we give each system a joke in Chinese, and both systems hand out answers corresponding to ha ha. And John Searle is, in the case that he's producing the answers by the execution of the program, is utterly unaware he's been given a joke. Now contrast that scenario with the situation where Searle's given a joke in English. On this occasion, he might also respond ha ha, but he has the phenomenal sensation that accompanies finding a joke funny. So this leads to a point that the computer scientist, cognitive scientist, and philosopher Stefan Hahn had made in an essay called Lunch Uncertain, which was his review of Luciano Floridi's book, The Philosophy of Information. Hahn claims that there is always, often a phenomenal component to understanding. And in fact, if you go into the literature, the psychological literature on understanding, there's countless experiments which build on such a predicate. So the claim is that when humans grasp and understand a concept, there's something it is like to be to have understood that. And that's the same sort of thing that you get when you've got a joke. You've got that phenomenal sensation. And there's one difference. This is the deep ontological gap between the two systems. No matter how good the program is, it will never instantiate that phenomenal sensation of getting the joke. There'll always be an ontological distinction between the two systems. I hope that's answered your question.
Yes, thanks a lot.
Yeah, there was some. Tom, did you want to add a comment or?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah.
I just repeat what I typed, but I think the problem with the Searle Chinese room experiment is that it kind of mistakes where understanding happens in natural brains. Is that, I mean, it's not, the little subcomponents, of course, themselves don't understand anything. The whole system does. And I think the standard response to the Chinese room is that, if Searle himself is sitting in this room and only speaks English, he doesn't understand Chinese, but the whole room around him is a mind. Him plus the room. Only the joint system can be said to understand anything, and it can be said to understand.
Okay, I mean, one of the amusing things on two of these arguments that I've discussed with you guys and girls today, Searle's Chinese room and Penrose's position as espoused in, for example, The Shadows of the Mind or The Emperor's New Mind. I remember debating Penrose with a very senior professor of cognitive science at a major UK university, a person who I know well as a friend, and I'm not going to embarrass by giving his name out here, over a massive email exchange for a number of months. And after about 6 months, I just said, have you looked at pages 70 to 100 of The Shadows of the Mind, where these questions are answered in detail? And the guy responded to me, no, life's far too short to bother reading Penrose. And I found that happen countless times when we discuss the Chinese room and Roger Penrose. A lot of people, these are arguments that a lot of people have a position on, but far fewer people have actually read Searle's original paper. So my first point to you, Tom, is have you read the original unedited version of Minds, Brains and Programs published in Behavioral and Brain Sciences in 1980?
No, I have not.
No, right. Well, were you to do so, that Searle at the end of the paper considers a host of responses to his position, and the very first one he considers is the so-called systems reply. And Searle's response to the systems reply, remember we're talking about a thought experiment here now. Searle imagines that he's some kind of idiot savant that can internalize all the bits of paper that make up the Chinese room and the program. So Searle now in his head is carrying forth every operation of the program and scribbling every operation on, instead of on physical bits of paper, on bits of paper that he mentally holds in his head. He can then give responses to questions in Chinese that are indistinguishable from those a native Chinese person would give, but still without understanding a word of Chinese.
Right, but he plus the papers.
There's no papers now. There's no papers now.
The internalized papers, yeah. He plus the internalized rules the joint system understands.
No, it doesn't, because I can give you exactly the example I gave to the lady who asked the first question. I can present, to see the difference, you've got to look at the difference between ontology and epistemology. If we give Searle a question, a joke in Chinese, right, he will not find it funny, right? And at the end of that experiment, so I'm presenting Searle with two jokes now. First is in English. I can present it to Searle. Did you find the joke funny? Yep. Second experiment, I give Searle a joke in Chinese and another text which is not a joke. I then put a question to Searle. Which of those was a joke in Chinese? He will not be able to answer because he won't find.
But whether it doesn't matter whether he's internalized the rules or they're external. He is not the system. Only the he plus the rules are the system. And he plus the rules may find it funny.
I'm saying Searle's internalized the rules and the bits, but there is nothing other. There's nothing else. There's just Searle.
Yeah.
In his prodigious memory.
Searle and the rules is a different system.
Which are inside his head. No, but they're inside his head. Remember the entire program.
Yeah, but I mean, you can have multiple programs on a computer interacting with each other, and you would never say that like Word by itself is a complete system. We wouldn't say Microsoft, Windows by itself is a system. Only Word and Windows working together can make
conceive of it to be so. I think we're getting off piste here now, Tom, but you certainly could conceive of it to be so. And also, again, if you know your computability theory, we're not going to gain anything by having multiple copies of different programs. That's still what we can still implement them on a single Turing machine. And the same, it's answering your question. Right. You can conceive of running million programs on one machine and conceive of it as a program under a universal Turing machine.
Yeah, I don't think
we're getting off piece. Well, if there's no other questions, I'm happy to debate with you, Tom, for the rest of the evening. But perhaps it might be a good time to ask anyone else.
I also need to leave now. Sorry.
Yeah, all right. Reagan, do you want to unmute?
Yeah. Thanks for the nice presentation. I wanted to ask. There is now a bunch of work where people are trying to work on neurosymbolic, trying to give computer the ability to reason or maybe to incorporate mathematical logics. Do you think this can have an impact on computer?
Well, I think it might make for better systems. And in fact, I was at a conference in Cyprus just a couple of weeks ago where we had some great presentations on neurosymbolic approaches. I think the a priori arguments I've raised today, what's interesting about them, they stand or fail on their logic. You might take a position like Tom did and say there's a fundamental flaw with something like Searle's Chinese room. I believe that Tom's question is robustly rebutted by Searle in the original paper, but perhaps you might not do. And in all the positions I've described today, they're a priori, and if the arguments are correct, they stand against any conceivable computer program. So neurosymbolic won't buy us anything. It might make us more epistemically, we might get systems that behave better and more usefully, but it won't answer any of the deep questions about whether these systems still understand, have mathematical insight, or insight in general, I would argue, or can be conscious. The results of those questions, unless you find fault with the logic of the three arguments that I discussed today, is a resounding no.
Yeah. Okay, thanks.
I'm trying to get some light without getting roasted by the sun. It's a bit warm where I am at the moment.
Yeah. Other questions or comments?
I'm happy to stay and answer questions until there are no more.
I'll ask another one if no one's if no one raises their hand.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
So it's a big problem with LLMs and all of these AIs is they don't know when they don't know. And from listening to your talk, it sounds like they will never, ever be able to make that call of saying, I don't know this information, because they fundamentally cannot understand the stuff they're telling you. Even if it makes a lot of sense and it sounds very smart, they don't understand the information, therefore they cannot assess whether they have the ability to give you that information confidently. Yeah,
you've nailed it. I think
okay.
This is why Searle's argument is so prescient and apposite now, because people are making wild claims about LLMs, which are just not justified, in my opinion. And for many reasons, they're not just because of the fundamental philosophical reason that relates to Searle as to why these systems don't understand. But there are technical reasons why they might, where we still need to go some way to get better and better machines. But I would argue that Searle's argument fundamentally is a fundamental reason, one of many reasons why these systems make behave appallingly badly in the very ways that I tried to outline in the first part of my presentation today.
Can I
if the system actually understood what it was to be racist, we would be able then to have a system that wouldn't be racist, that we could put guardrails in so it wouldn't be. If we had a system, if it knew what it'd be to be homophobic, the system would understand not to be so. But it doesn't understand. It has no more. These LLMs have no more idea that they're communicating with humans than they do counting bananas on a production line. They've got no idea they're doing anything. It's again, I've got to go back to my background. My first degree was in cybernetics, and in my first year, I built from literally individual logic gates a half an adder, which is one of the primary components of a CPU. And let me tell you this, when you've actually built computers from the lowest level logical components, I don't just mean like by a board, which is what people tend to mean these days when they say they build a computer. You really realize that these things are going through a very simple series of mechanical operations. There's no choice. As long as it's well engineered, it has to be. Certain events are entailed by the current state and the state of the input to the system. And that gives you, I think, a very different perspective on computation in general and on claims about AI in particular.
Okay, thanks. I have a comment on the previous question. So I think, yes, I don't think LLM can ever know that it's uncertain or doesn't know, but that problem is more solvable in that sense that there are ways to measure the uncertainty of a neural net or a deep learning model. One of them is using conformal distribution, blah, 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 all that kind of stuff. Of course, it has strong exchangeability assumption, blah, 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 all that kind of stuff. So even within the LLM itself, because it is probabilistic and is rely on greedy search, I feel that inside the guts of an LLM, there are plenty of clues about it being certain or uncertain, except that information is not available as an output. So, I think that problem may be not that we want to solve it, but I would say that research direction at least have some promise that you will use something like the confidence bound. Okay, that's just my I don't know, it's my comment. I don't know. Well, Professor, I hope you can comment on that. Yeah.
I'll do my best. I think I alluded at this kind of answer when I was talking about you use the analogy of the plasma globe. Let's move slightly away from language and look at things that can happen in the world. And I think this is very a relevant point today with the realization of autonomous vehicles, because it's my prediction that we won't get level 5 automation very easily. And that's for those of you who are not familiar, this is a full self-driving car in any place in the world under any conditions. I think we will get self-driving cars in restricted environments, particularly when we can remove nasty humans from the scene. But unrestricted full self-driving, I don't see ever coming. And for this reason, because the number of things that can happen in the world, I argue, is uncountably infinite. And to deal with the uncountably infinite, you have to understand what's going on in the world and have a deep understanding at a very human level about what's going on in the world. And as I've argued, via Searle, I don't believe computers can ever have that level of understanding about the world. Now, as engineers, we might be able to, over the countably infinite number of solutions that any computer program can reason over, we might be able to get the system to be better and better over that relatively small domain. But over the uncountably infinite myriad of possibilities that an autonomous vehicle might encounter in the world, I think it's extremely unlikely that we will get an engineering solution that will be able to deal with that in a safe way. So to come back to your point, yeah, I think we'll be able to engineer LLMs and other AI technologies. At the moment, we're all focusing on LLMs, but I'm sure in 10 years' time, there'll be a new technology that will be exciting all of our research. Whatever that technology is, as engineers, we'll try our best to develop algorithms to get better and better and better. And I'm sure that we will. But I don't think that will allow these algorithms to deal in an understanding, human-like way with all the uncountably infinite possibilities that the world throws up at us.
Rick, do you want to unmute?
Yes, thank you. Yeah,
Yeah,
so
can I say one thing about the oh,
Yeah, Tom,
can I
can
say
you
one
just,
thing? I think it's
yeah,
restarted.
Tom, can you just let Rick ask his
Yeah,
question?
sure.
Yeah,
Go
next,
ahead.
yeah, thank
yeah, I wanted to start with a little bit of a comment. I appreciated one of the examples that you gave near the beginning of the talk, because my own first test of ChatGPT, just to see how well it would work, was that I asked it to write an essay, a brief essay on a certain topic, with a little bit of an unusual topic. So I just wanted to see if it would do that. And so, yes, it actually relatively quickly generated a 5 or 6 paragraph essay. The content was correct, and the grammar was beautiful, of course. It was probably better than many students would have in these days. But as an instructor, my first reaction would be that I would give it not an A, the highest grade, I would give it the next grade a B, because it was, as you noted in different words, it was essentially just repeating information from various sources it could find. So
it wasn't understanding the topic of the essay, I would argue, in a human-like way.
Yes, exactly. That's what I was heading towards. And so I'd say a student who really understood the topic and was able to synthesize the information in the sources would come up with an essay which would have some new and, I would say, creative way of expressing that student's ideas. And so that made me start to think and wonder then, in your comments, later on, you talked a lot about an agent or a system that could understand and have experience of its this phenomenological experience of its environment. But then also, again, there's this notion of creativity, and so I'm just curious, in a sense, where a notion of creativity would fall into these general discussions here.
Yeah, I love the question, and yeah, you're absolutely right. All the idea of creativity strongly impacts the discussion that we're having. If we go back to, I think one of the leading philosophers on creativity is Professor Margaret Bowden from Sussex, who wrote a book called Dimensions of Creativity, and in that book, Margaret described 3 modes of creativity. I'm sorry, but I've forgotten the exact terminology she used for each of these, so I can describe them to you. The first effectively was interpolative. So you train a neural network with examples of, a painting like Rembrandt, and then you say, give me a new painting in the style of Rembrandt. And Bowden calls that interpolative creativity. We're creating something new that's never existed in the world before, but it's of a style that's been taught in its training set. The second is more like creativity in terms of building blocks. So this is like compositional. So we get lots and lots of building blocks and we rearrange the building blocks in different ways. I think Bowden might call that compositional creativity. And both of those, she predicted, and this is going back, Dimensions of Creativity must have come out around 20 years ago, so long before LLMs were on the scene. And Bowden sort of predicted that we would get very good computer systems at both of those modes of being creative, which we've seen. And in the examples I gave today, for example, showing you an image of the Turing Institute in the style of Dali, it's not a bad attempt of a pastiche. But the third element of creativity that Bowden identified, and for want of a better terms, I can't remember the term that Bowden used, let's call it strong creativity. The sort of creativity that Marcel Duchamp used when he created the fountain, the pissoir that he exhibited in an art gallery in the early part of the last century. Now that spoke to the community of artists. Now you can't get that level of creativity. It's the same creativity that was used when we had the famous stack of bricks exhibited in the Tate. To the layperson, the non-artist, this both seem ridiculous, because the layperson misses the language of artistic debate, where a piece of art gets meaning from its part in a discourse, in a role, an artistic discourse that is ongoing. Now, without understanding that artistic discourse, there's no way that a neural network could be creative in the way that Tracy Emin was with her unmade bed, or Duchamp was, or the famous pile of bricks in the Tate are. So yeah, I think that deep creativity, human creativity, needs an understanding not least of the language of the art domain to which you're trying to be creative in applies. So yeah, an interesting point. Thanks.
Yeah, no, and thank you for the answers or the examples. That helps a lot too. And it's another one. It's like, Beethoven taking, where Mozart is leaving off, but by the end of his life, he's creating something fundamentally different in music, which is part of this context. Again, he started with a certain place in his cultural context and creating something new. Yeah.
A beautiful example. One of my colleagues, sadly now departed, who said to me when we were discussing AI, he says the amazing thing about Bach, what differentiates real Bach from a pastiche Bach, is that Bach knew when to stop sounding like Bach.
That's a good point.
And the other thing about it, I used to say when I'm asked to give talks about AI and LLMs in particular, well, one of the good use cases of LLMs, and I used to say until fairly recently, well, one of the good use cases is in summarizing text. And as you highlighted, I'm not so sure that it is, because if you've got a text that is talking about something for which there is a lot of data on the internet, then there's a reasonable chance you might get a good summary. But if you're doing something new, a discussion of a new law in the European Parliament is a particular use case that springs to mind, then you'll find that the LLM is pretty rubbish. It's good at shortening the text, but because it doesn't understand what's being discussed, it is pretty rubbish at giving you a decent synthesis, a decent summary of new stuff that's being detected. And that again folds back to this foundational issue I keep banging on about, that these systems, indeed all computational systems, do not understand.
Yes. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. Ismail, did you want to ask?
There's a cool observation you can do with things like GPT, where you ask it to play hangman with you and have it make the guess, and then it make the word, and then you keep giving it guesses. And simple systems that are just a wrapper around a language model are basically guessing along with you, because they have no hidden state. They see exactly the same thing that you see on the page. So they might make a nonsense word that keeps saying that, oh yeah, that's in the word, that's in the word, that's in the word, and you end, you get just a string of letters. It doesn't make any sense, because they had nothing hidden up their sleeve the whole time. I was trying just now. I thought maybe they would have fixed this bug.
Have you got a link?
You can try this with any of the open source, any of the openly available language models. I just tried it just now with GPT 4.0, and they still haven't fixed this. I thought maybe they have some hidden state stuff in GPT now, and I thought maybe they would have fixed this just as a use case, but they still haven't. But I think this is a good demonstration that
absolutely
the LLMs by themselves are nothing. They have to have structure around them to do useful things, like hidden state or like memory. Things like this will make them much more useful. So I think by themselves they're impressive, but they will always do stupid stuff like that.
Well, if you have a moment, Tom, if you could send me a screenshot of an example, that would be awesome.
Yeah, I can send you the
meantime,
conversation.
I cut out one of the things I'm very a thing that for which I agree with Searle on is that the notion that computation is inherently observer relative, and I've got a lot of things I could talk about that to try and establish that fact for you. And yeah, I mean, we have to give large language models context. We have to give them, as you said, internal states from the outside, because they haven't got that knowledge internally. But I would argue in general, You know, there's all computational systems are what, to use the jargon, are called allopoetic. They're not autopoetic. They're allopoetic. They're engineered for a particular purpose. And that is their purpose, their meaning is defined outside the system. If you're anyone interested, look at Oron Chagria's work on multiple computations, or just think about a simple logical OR gate under the convention that naught means false and one means true, and then look at the same gate under the convention that naught means true and one means false, and you'll find you get exactly the same electronics will give you two different logical functions.
I put a link in the chat.
There's always a mapping in any computation between the physical states of the system and the logical or computational states, always. But of course, people tend to gloss over that.
We should invite Ishmael to pose this question.
Yeah, thank you very much for your nice presentation. Actually, let me start my question with this cliché that say a computer is a person that is fast and stupid. Actually, I say fast and stupid, stupid fast. Actually, I think what is the distinguish the human and machine is creativity
and insight.
Yeah, and we cannot blame the computer or app with inappropriate scale. Let me say an example. Consider a chess game program. It can train by itself during playing several times, and if this playing be fast, it can train fast. But we cannot. We know we cannot drive the car by this program. Why it cannot be happen? Because the mathematics behind of chess app program is different. Actually, I want to ask your idea about how we can distinguish the weakness mathematical model behind the neural network, or and the causality effect.
Okay, can I've got two slides on a different presentation that I'd like to show you. So just bear with me for 1 second while I load up a different presentation.
I am an AI researcher in the signal detection in Taiwan.
Okay, give me a second. I'm going to show you.
Mathematical behind the neural network is very important. We cannot use any kind of neural network, for example, in my work in detection. How we can actually distinguish this?
Well, I think I've got a response to both your questions in 2 slides, which I've used elsewhere. So I'm just going to grab these now and show you. Here we go. All right. So I'll just unhide that. And unhide that. Well, first of all, I'll do all 3 actually, as this has come up. And unhide that.
We're not seeing anything yet.
I'm just, sorry, I'm getting the presentation ready. I'm now ready. I'm just going to share my screen. If I can go back to this, and all right. Hopefully, can you see the first of these slides now? So I'm looking at the meaning of a.
Not yet.
What? Should be.
No, not yet.
I haven't pressed the button to share. Now I should. Right, you got it?
Yes, we got it now.
All right, brilliant. So I'm looking at the meaning of a computation. The computation, look at, there's a logic gate shown on the right-hand side of the screen with 2 inputs, A and B. And I argue that it's fundamentally defined by a mapping between what constitutes a value of true and what constitutes a value of false. This is the example I gave a minute ago to Ishmael. If we have the gate functions as an OR function if we take 0 to be true and 1 to be false, and it functions as an AND function if we take 0 to be false and 1 to be true. So This is mere engineering technicalities of defining how the voltage levels are mapped to logical or computational states. And in fact, we see this because as a hardware engineer, there are many different types of logic. We can have CMOS, TTL, emitter coupled logic. All of these map different voltage levels to different logical truths or false. So a notional space alien from Mars could not determine what computation a particular device is doing unless they know the mapping between voltage levels and computational state. And in fact, in a paper by Chagrier, we can actually make it worse. Chagrier imagines a gate that has a tristable gate. If both inputs are over 5 volts, the gate outputs 5 to 10. If both inputs are under 2.5 volts, the gate outputs 0 to 2.5. And for anything else, the gate's output is 2.5 to 5 volts. And this means that we get an AND function if 0 to 5 volts means 0 and 5 to 10 volts means 1, and an OR function in the case where 0 to 2.5 volts means 0 and 2.5 to 1 volts mean 1. And in fact, Chagrier shows how we can implement multiple different kinds of gates by different mappings between physics and the logical values. So, and he argues that this means that computational entails that a computational brain could potentially have 2 or in fact a myriad number of different minds. Now, let's come on to a second example from me. Here we've got a web program to play noughts and crosses. It's not a very good one, so hopefully I'll be able to beat it. And I have. Hooray. Right, so I've won. Brilliant. So program to play noughts and crosses. Now, did you know, I'm now going to teach this a different game. And in this game, we've got a deck of 9 cards that are shown above. And what we want to do is attempt to acquire 3 cards that add up to 15. So this is a new game, right? It's nothing to do with noughts and crosses. Each card can be drawn from this deck once and only once, and eventually you may have more than 3 cards in your hand, any 3 of which you can use to build a winning trick of 15. If neither player can achieve a winning trick, then the game is a draw. Now, what is interesting is that we can use a noughts and crosses playing machine and this magic square to play that card game. So now, if I say I'm going to play the ace of spades. Oops, oh, sorry. I've lost this now. Which would be this position. We put the thing down here. The machine responds with a 5 and the center, which is a 5 card. I want to build 15, so I'm going to go to this position and try and get a 6, which will now mean I've got 7. So to get 15, I now need to play an 8, which is the bottom right, and I've added to 15. So now I'm using exactly the same program to play 2 semantically entirely different activities. One is playing noughts and crosses, the other is playing this card game. So we cannot, the semantics of the program are always, I argue, externally defined by a human world of meaning. So I can use this noughts and crosses program to play noughts and crosses, or I can use it to play this card game. Right? The program itself has no internal meaning of what the hell it's doing. It might equally well be counting tiddlywinks. It just doesn't know. Now, finally, and this is an example from a brilliant book by Winograd and Flores from 1986, Understanding Computers and Cognition. Winograd and Flores say that even if the computational logic is known, the function of the system as a whole is always observer relative, because different functions can arise from the different concerns of different users. Now, you mentioned a chess computer, Ishmael. Imagine we've got a chess computer here. I can, of course, use that system to play chess against. That is, we designed it to do that. We can use it. I'm talking about those old-fashioned chess computers. They got a pressure-sensitive board. So when I move a piece onto a certain square, it detects there's a piece there, and then it will show me where to move by illuminating another piece, another square on the board, and that tells me where I've got to move the opposition's piece to, okay? Now, what Winograd and Flores says, you can wire one of these up to some pressure pads in an art exhibition and some neons, and I can then use exactly the same program to create an interactive art exhibit in an art exhibition, right? At which point, the computer's not playing chess, it's creating an piece of interactive art. So I want to paraphrase the later Wittgenstein from the Philosophical Investigations. It seems to me that it's always the case that the meaning of a computation lies in its use. So that was their little
This is, yeah, very, I very much would agree with that. I think it's also like saying, what is the distribution of 4? It's not defined until you have a whole population of numbers. Then you can say, oh, it's a uniform distribution, it's a Gaussian distribution.
Yeah.
But there's a fun
Fleury
XKCD
talks
comment
about the
that says,
level
you
of
need a random
analysis.
number.
Yeah. Well, it's data. I mean, again, one of the problems about data science. I mean, I used to be an external examiner on a number of various MSCs around the country, and I sat on a number of data science MSCs. And one of the astonishing things to me is that I don't think I went to one where in lecture 1 on the first lecture on data science, anyone ever asked what data is. And there's, you know, this is not a trivial question. A blank piece of paper can be data, or it might not be. It depends on the context, the level of analysis. As again, Floridi in his brilliant book, The Philosophy of Information, where you got Luciano Floridi being the philosopher who opened up the entire area of the philosophy of information. And in his opening book, he goes into this in some depth, and it's well worth the read if you haven't read it already. Any more questions?
Any other questions or comments?
In which case, I'd like to thank you for listening to me, and thank you for inviting me.
Thank you very much. Thank you for coming.
Yeah, we'd like to thank you very much for a very stimulating presentation.
Yeah, so that was the last seminar for the academic year, and then we see you all in October or so. Yeah, thank you very much.
Bye.
Thanks. Bye-bye. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.